I want to welcome everyone today to the Manatee Tiger Bay Luncheon. My name is Xavier Bailey. I will be your moderator, and I am the president for 2021. Would you please stand with me for the Pledge of Allegiance? Today, we're going to be doing a legislation update with Tommy Gregory. I do want to give regards from our representative, Will Robinson. He had surgery and he's sorry, but he will be back soon, and we will bring him back, but he just wasn't up to being able to come today, so we did want to give his regards. We also did invite Representative Rayner. I'm not sure what happened with that communication, but we'll get her next time too. So today we're going to have Representative Tommy Gregory, District 73, and this is going to be your show today. You got this? I know you're going to do that. Welcome, Representative Tommy Gregory.
Thank you, Xavier. I asked her to skip the bio since I was already running late, and I know most of you anyway. First, let me say, anything that went wrong this year was Will Robinson's fault since he's not here. No mercy, just because he had surgery. I'm happy to report he's doing very well. If you want to reach out to him by text, he'd love to hear from you. And since he's my roommate in Tallahassee and we're very dear friends, I'm happy to tell you the things he worked on if you have questions about his legislation. I'm happy to be back here. I'm sorry that I'm interrupting your lunch in this view, really. Every time I come to Manatee County and this Tiger Bay meeting, it's a little difficult to concentrate. You really have a wonderful facility here, so we thank you for hosting it. Let me say what I think about this legislative year in Tallahassee. I think it was full of historic wins. Now, I hope we have some good, tough, bipartisan questions, and you can ask me, to defend bills that you disagree with me on, but let me just highlight a few of them before we jump into questions. First, we passed the largest expansion of school choice in the nation. It deserves a huge applause. It is a monumental accomplishment when you look at where Florida was 20 years ago and where our public schools are today and our private schools are today and our public charter schools. We continue to climb in the rankings because we continue to give parents choices. We let the educators educate and give the parents choices of where they want to send their kids. And the proof is in the pudding. I'll just give you one example. From when I was on an education committee last year, schools came and presented, and if I didn't share this with example with you before, I'd like to now. I think it was Citrus High School came and presented. So public high school, Citrus County, just to the north of us. Well, I guess it's an hour or two to the north of us, but Citrus High School, when you graduate from there, if you choose one of their vocational type tracks, you graduate with your private pilot's license. Now, that kind of innovation was unheard of 20 years ago, and it's not heard of in many other states in this great country, but it is heard of in Florida. And that's a sign that giving parents the choice and forcing schools to innovate is paying huge dividends for our students. We also passed this year Florida's first flooding and sea level rise plan, which is absolutely critical for the state of Florida. Thankfully, we don't have this problem in this part of Florida. But to the south of us, in Miami and in the Keys, they now have sunny day flooding. Simply from the tides rising, their streets are flooding without rain. So on sunny days, roads can be flooded out down there. We've got to address this all along Florida's coastline. We also passed a bill to protect Florida businesses and innocent bystanders from the ravages of the mob, right? Combating public disorder. I hope I get some questions on this bill so I can tell you what a great bill it is. But I am going to tell you right now that it protects businesses, it protects innocent bystanders, and it protects people that are protesting or marching or whatever they're doing. Peaceful protesters are protected by this bill so that their mission and their voices aren't hijacked by violent criminals. We also provided some legal protection for businesses as they've had to deal with the variety of challenges that COVID presented. The last thing our businesses needed was, kind of frivolous, overzealous attorneys going in there and litigating them to death. And so what we have done is pass a COVID liability bill to make it harder to file frivolous lawsuits and give businesses some legal insulation from that liability, as long as they were complying with the government's regulations in place. We also passed this bill might have, gone under the radar for most of you, but we passed a bill that's going to provide home book delivery 9 months out of the year, free books for students that are struggling in reading. And not just books, but lesson plans and resources for the parents or caregivers for those children who are struggling in school, think pre-K through 5th grade. Because we know that that's the years we have to capture these kids and get them up to grade reading level. So home book delivery, huge win for Florida's legislature this year. We also tackled big issues like insurance reform, election integrity, Parents' Bill of Rights, juvenile expungement. We got across the finish line this year. Now, I'm not going to ask you by show of hands how many of you might have done something you regret when you were a juvenile, but I will tell you that I think most of us might raise our hands if we were asked with that kind of question. And I'll also tell you that with my 20 years in the military, I had the great privilege of working with and advising fighter pilots, astronauts, 4-star generals, and I'll tell you many of them had one thing in common, and that was they had done something in their youth that they regretted. And maybe they had done something in their young military career that they regretted, but they had been able to rehabilitate and go on to achieve great things for themselves and for their family and for this country. And I'm really excited that we're able to get juvenile expungement across the finish line this year. And I will tell you that will make a huge difference for 27,000 people in Florida immediately. And just think about what those 27,000 people might accomplish in their lifetime because they were given a second chance. Locally, of interest to you probably, is certainly of interest to my friend, my firefighter in the back row here, is we merged, at their request, 2 fire districts in Manatee County, out east, Myakka, East Manatee County. That's going to bring efficiency, and it's going to bring lower taxes. So that's a big win for all of those people that are affected in that section of Manatee County. And then we also made some adjustments to a special recreation district that they brought forward. There are some bills that I was unhappy didn't pass. I'll save that for later if anybody wants to ask about those kind of bills. And let me tell you, lastly, what's important to me, and I think it's important to all of you, and that is building roads and building roads and building roads. We've got to have the roads in Manatee County. We've got to have them in Sarasota County. We need them all over Florida. How many people are moving here every day? Who knows? Shout it out. 1,000 people a day. We are gaining a new Manatee County in this state every year, just from people moving in. Forget births. People moving into the state, we gain a new Manatee County every year, and a lot of them are moving to Manatee County. Right? If you live anywhere near Parrish or anywhere near the interstate in Lakewood Ranch, you know how that's rippling through our quality of life, because that's how long it takes you to get to work. That's how long it takes you to get your kids to school. That's how long it takes you to get to this luncheon, which, by the way, is not my excuse today for being a few minutes late. That was simple car problems, technology problems. But that's life. But we can make it a little bit better if we put more state money and more local money into the infrastructure. That'll help all of you in this room with your quality of life, and it'll help our economy grow. So I think it's critical we continue to work on that. Now, I will say, selfishly, and frankly for your protection, this is an important issue because I have 3 teenage sons. I have 3 teenage boys driving on these roads every day with you. And they're not the only teenagers driving on these roads. And they're not the only people who may be struggling with keeping our roads safe. So let's do everything we can to not just build more roads, but to address those dangerous intersections. I'll tell you one, so we successfully got appropriations for road construction this year. We did last year, we did the year before. Now, it was a little easier those 2 years because we had the Senate president from our own backyard. We were able to get more money, but it's just one of those things. There were some privileges and some perks from having the Senate president from Manatee County. We don't have that right now, but what we do have is a champion in Jim Boyd, and I think probably everybody in this room knows Jim Boyd, and he works really hard, so that's why we're able. Yeah, he deserves an applause. I know he couldn't be here today either, but he doesn't just help us with road construction money. Really, every single bill that we got passed as your local delegation, he had a big hand in. Speaking of which, I will give a shout out. You mentioned that, our representative Michelle's not here, but if you don't know, she's running for Congress. So her plate is probably full wherever she is, and her congressional district doesn't come down into Manatee County, so she's probably focused on that right now. But I will say she worked very well with the delegation and did a good job helping us represent you. So road construction is going to continue to be my focus for your quality of life and for the development of our economy and our prosperity. And then if you don't know this about me, I'm a conservative. And for me, that means I believe in defending the foundational principles of our country. I believe that it's more important that we love freedom than it is big government. So you'll always see me filing bills along those lines or supporting bills that protect our way of life and our foundational values, things like civic education or protection of the Second Amendment, the parental rights bill I mentioned earlier. I'm always going to work on those things, and I did again this year. Now, I'll just tell you quickly, I already mentioned we had Senator Boyd in the Senate, Michelle, who will serve one more year with us. We also have Fiona McFarland. She doesn't come into Manatee County, but we work with our Sarasota delegation as well, who did good work for you. And then Will, who's not here. So I'll tell you what Will and I did in the legislature this year. Will was selected to chair a committee in something that he doesn't know anything about, really. Well, now he does because he had surgery this week, but he chaired a healthcare committee this past year. And I should say he didn't know anything about it before he was elected because just like you would expect from Will Robinson, as soon as they selected him for that position, I will tell you because I saw him doing it, he watched every subcommittee and committee hearing in the healthcare silo going back over the last 2 years to prepare himself for the issues that he would have to face. And he did a marvelous job chairing an important subcommittee in the Florida House. As for me, I'm the whip in judiciary, which literally means you whip votes, means you convince people to vote up for the bills that you want them to vote up on. For me, I'm in the majority party in the Florida House, which is the Republican Party, so I'm a majority Republican Party whip inside judiciary. So if there was a bill that went through the Criminal Justice Subcommittee, the Civil Justice Subcommittee, or anything dealing with the Judiciary Committee as a whole, that means I had to know about that bill, and I had to talk to all the members about that bill. And I'm happy to say they didn't require much whipping, right? They were on board with all the big accomplishments that we were pushing through the Florida House this year. I think that's enough for me to start off with. I just wanted to give you kind of an overview of what we did, and now I want to hear questions from you. Who's got some good ones?
For the record, Glenn Julian, thank you very much for coming to lunch. You know, I do affordable housing, and my question to you, I've reached out to all 4 elected Representative Boyd, Gruger, you, and Robinson on why the rating of the Sadowski funds, one, continued, and then this year, you guys, all four of you voted to raid 50% of it, not only hit and miss, but forever. So if that's your decision, I would like to know what made you make that decision, because there were certainly other funds to rob, to make up that difference that you could have looked at. And I just felt that the affordable housing and the realtors, we do affordable housing. We got homeless vets. Our funds are now cut in half. The city's going to get about 300,000. We may get about $1.5 million. How are we going to make up that difference? Because I've asked that question and nobody seems to have an answer. So you do great stuff. This is a sticking point for me, and I just had to ask. Thank you so much.
Great question. And so let me give some background on that. The Sadowski Trust Fund, funded by dock stamp taxes, has been rated almost every year for, what do you think, Glenn, 20 years? And it was one of the first things I looked at once I was elected and went to Tallahassee, in part because I've been a volunteer and a board member with Habitat for Humanity in Sarasota. Well, not the whole time. I didn't live in Sarasota this whole time, but my entire life, 25 plus years now, I've been involved with Habitat for Humanity. So I've seen the difference that providing attainable and affordable housing can provide. And that's just one of many examples of organizations that help in this arena. So I was a little horrified when I was elected to learn that over $1 billion had been raided from the so-called trust fund. So naturally, I figured out what you already know is it isn't really a trust fund. It's something that we labeled a trust fund. In statute, if you read it by name, it says trust fund, but it also says it's essentially not locked down. It's funded out of what they would say is the general revenue. That money comes from the dock stamp taxes. And there's a great legal argument and philosophical debate over whether or not all of that money should go to affordable housing or where it should go. But the fact of the matter is, it is not a trust fund. It is absolutely mislabeled to call it a trust fund. That doesn't mean rating it is the right answer. I just want you to know it isn't as if for 20 years your legislature was ignoring the law. But they were certainly taking money that most people would say, wait a minute, shouldn't that be in the Sadowski Trust Fund, and shouldn't that be available for organizations like yours that are building affordable housing? And as I said, that's a good point to make. It's a good public policy argument. But I'll tell you why we took those votes this year. And especially on the heels of fully funding Sadowski last year, and maybe the year before, but certainly last year before COVID. We took that vote because we looked at the history of the legislature rating this almost every year. And when they rated it, they didn't take 50%. They took it all. So this year we decided, you know what, they don't have any true protection as a trust fund in Florida. So we're going to give it to them. We're going to put it in law that 50% of that money that people would think is earmarked for them is actually going to be earmarked for them and go into that trust fund. Not to be rated as like a source of general revenue where when we go into the budgeting process, we can move it wherever we want. So now they are going to get 50%, but that's essentially 100% from them from now on. But I agree, it's 50% of the max they could have received in any given year. My point being, and this is, it's harsh math, but 50% is better than zero. So we took it as a victory that we could codify it, that we could direct some funds to affordable, workforce, attainable housing. We call it a lot of different things, but we were happy to put it in law that they're going to get that money. And then when you look where the other money went to, there's no limit to worthy good causes, right? It's very difficult to look at the Florida budget and say, well, that money's not going to a worthy cause. The money's going to worthy causes, and we have protected, I hesitate, I almost said forever. Of course, it's not forever, right? Because a future legislature could change the law. But the bottom line is we decided 50% is better than zero, and we like the protection of having codified it into law.
3 teenage boys, presumably energetically engaged in doing things they'll later regret. Just saying. Wondered if you had any thing to say about something that is very salient in the minds of Manatee County residents, and that's Piney Point.
Great question. I should not have neglected to cover Piney Point at the beginning, because I'm not sure there could have been a greater victory or anything closer to a massive natural disaster than what we had at Piney Point. So if you don't know the history of Piney Point, let me give it to you very quickly. This was phosphate mining operation, giant retention ponds, 3 ponds on the site of an old phosphate mine. Think 60 plus years ago, that's when this mining was done. And when they do the phosphate mining and they produce the fertilizers and other products, there's a leftover product called phosphogypsum. It looks like dirt, except it's not very helpful for the environment kind of dirt, right? It's certainly, right, to say the least. Some of it is worse than others. But what they do is they pile all this dirt up in the mining operation into, I guess you could say it's like half of a pyramid in height and in design, 4 sides. These walls go up 60 feet in height, some of them. And in the middle of the pyramid, it's hollowed out, so it's a pond. There's 3 ponds at Piney Point. Roughly, they hold between 300 to 600 million gallons of water apiece. When the leak was discovered at Piney Point this year, and the experts immediately did the analysis, it was a small leak, about, I don't remember how far up that 30 to 60 feet tall wall, but it was far enough that they said, if this leak becomes catastrophic, which it can, right? You know how water, it's heavy and it presses through, and once there's a hole in the wall, it's going to continue to push and get bigger and bigger. If the wall had broken, we would have had a catastrophic event. We would have had a 30 to 60 foot tall wall of water rushing out of Piney Point. Luckily, it's mostly, kind of an industrial section, but it would have hit residences. We did have to evacuate a number of homes. We didn't require them to, but most of them smartly and voluntarily said they would evacuate. But let me give you some behind the scenes. First of all, your county commissioners have been working on this issue for, I couldn't even tell you, decades, right? But in particular, over the last 5 to 10 years, they've been heavily engaged. The reality is, the state of Florida and your Manatee County commissioners should not have to have done anything. The original company that operated that plant should have had a bond so that if they went bankrupt, the bond would kick in and it would have covered, with the lifetime of these retention ponds and eventually closing them up and stopping it. But I don't know who your Manatee County commissioners were 60 plus years ago, or if the idea even existed at that time for the government to require a bond for that type of company. I will tell you this, it is the only legacy site in the state of Florida. Because of course we have phosphate mining now, but naturally it's a very heavily regulated, much safer industry than it used to be, and of course they require bonds. This one though, like I said, did not. So when they went bankrupt, over the series of the next couple of decades, different steps were taken that with hindsight we could say, well, why would we do that, right? For example, when they dredged Tampa Bay, they decided to put that dredged material, seawater and sand, into one of these retention ponds. Hundreds of millions of gallons of additional material and water were added. Well, those were not contaminated waters, but they still mixed in and they're still surrounded by phosphogypsum. So I know I could go on and bore you to tears with the details, but the main takeaway is it was a very dangerous, even if there was nothing contaminated in that particular pond that would have been harmful to the environment, or the level of how harmful it was not as bad as the other 2 ponds, it still would have been catastrophic damage in terms of flooding. as soon as this happened, Governor DeSantis and his staff called all of our offices in the delegation. So the very next morning, 7:30 in the morning, Governor DeSantis had me and Will Robinson and Jim Boyd and the President of the Senate, the head of DEP and Emergency Management. We were at the governor's mansion at 7:30 in the morning, driving to his plane, flying to SRQ, and driving over to Piney Point. So you may have seen that press conference, but that's how quickly his staff responded. I will tell you, he quizzed the entire delegation the whole time on the history. He had briefing books that his staff had prepared for him. He was in the weeds, in the details. What is the problem? Why wasn't it fixed in the past? Okay, that's a lengthy and sometimes unhelpful story. How do we fix it now? How do we fix it right now? And like a lot of problems, the solution is money. The interim solution was the reaction from DEP and emergency management and all the great things that they did on the ground to mitigate the disaster and working with your county commissioners and your administrator. But the long-term solution was the money. And thankfully, at Will Robinson's suggestion, at the urging of the county commissioners, we made it the #1 delegation priority when we met over a year ago. So we already had an appropriation in place. I don't remember the exact amount that we were asking for. I'll ballpark and say we might have been asking for $20 million. We got $100 million. Yeah, it's a huge victory for Piney Point. It's going to take more. It's going to take more to solve it because it's not just stopping the leak, right? We could stop the leak. We could drain that water out like we did in this case, and what's going to happen in Florida? It's going to fill right back up with rainwater, which is not contaminated, but the phosphogypsum still remains surrounding it. So long-term problem that I think the state of Florida and this governor has said, enough's enough. We're going to solve this. It's the only one like it in the state, thankfully, and we're going to fix Piney Point, and we've already started.
Doesn't that qualify as a federal Superfund site?
And that is being worked in the background as well. We're not satisfied with, leaving federal Superfund site dollars on the table. We've asked them to come in and help, and we hope that they do. I don't have insight to share with you on whether or not those discussions will be helpful. I will say, your local congressional delegation has been to the site, so they're engaged as well. Sorry, I know that was a long answer, but it's a big issue. Anybody got shorter questions?
I'm going to ask these questions.
Oh, you have
I just
questions.
need to make
Go
sure
ahead.
it's on the camera. So I want you to elaborate a little bit on the juvenile expansion and what that includes, and also the reasoning for the anti-riot bill, just to inform people why it was actually just a little bit deeper, because some constituents may feel that it's preventing them from actually, utilizing their rights, which it doesn't seem like that, but I would like you to just elaborate on that a little bit more. And then there was one more. Oh, how do you feel our tourism is going? Do you think it is increasing and doing better, and we're kind of afloat, and it's getting even better? If you can just a little elaborate on that for us. Thank you.
Well, I think I've covered the juvenile expungement bill, but what it does is give juveniles a chance to clear their record, right? And for all of you innocent people in the room, expungement means they wipe your record clean, and you don't have to say that you were ever arrested. It's as if legally it never happened. And so it really does give them a clean slate. It's, of course, not going to allow expungement for violent homicides and the most serious felonies, but more low-level offenses that juveniles do tend to, find themselves in those situations. So let me jump to the combating public disorder anti-riot bill. I'll just tell you that bill was heavily emotionally debated. I saw it 3 times in the Criminal Justice Subcommittee, in the Justice Appropriations Subcommittee, and in Judiciary. And then I saw it on the House floor where it was emotionally charged debate. But let me just put you in the room for the Criminal Justice Subcommittee. And first, I'll tell you what the bill does. What the bill does is increase penalties for things that are already crimes. In a nutshell, that's what the bill does. But only if you're part of a riot. Now, the reason it doesn't impact free speech, which again, given my background and my position on always defending liberty, right, you have to start with the First Amendment. But the First Amendment is very clear on its face. It's the right to assemble peaceably. Peaceably is the key word in the First Amendment, right? And there's a reason that it's in there, because it wasn't meant to protect criminal behavior. Now, if you are participating in a peaceful protest and you throw rocks and break a window, harm an innocent bystander, attack a police officer, it's already illegal. And nobody is complaining that that somehow violates their First Amendment rights, because it doesn't, because there is no First Amendment right to commit violent acts. And in the exact same way, nothing in this bill does anything to prevent people from exercising their First Amendment rights. But at the end of the day, what it does do is if you're participating in a riot, it's going to increase the penalties that you face for your criminal behavior. So the important question is, what's a riot? How do you define it, right? We know it's criminal acts taking place, and we can think of it in terms of a number of people that may be there. Maybe you have an image in your head of what it may be, but we did have to give clarity in the law to say, well, what are we talking about here? And the number of people that we ultimately decided on was 25. Now, some of the criticism and the debate continued to center around, well, wait a minute, there's lots of people protesting for any given reason in groups much larger than 25, and you're trying to criminalize that behavior. We say, no, it's not the number of people in your crowd, it's the number of criminal people in that crowd that are breaking the law, that are actually rioting. And their liability doesn't transfer to you. If you're peacefully protesting and a gang of 25 or more people comes in and starts breaking the law, only they can be held legally accountable under this combating public disorder law, because naturally your First Amendment rights are protected. Now, I said I would put you in the room, so I'll put you in the room for Criminal Justice Subcommittee. We sit in a room, much like this. Audience members come and the public comes, and they get so many minutes per person to testify and debate, essentially. And up here we have, depending on the committee, let's say we had 12, I think in that one we have 12 Republicans and 6 Democrats, just how the numbers break out because Republicans are in the majority. Less important than the breakout of the R's and D's up here is the people that come and speak for or against the bill. And I will just tell you, it is not a pleasant experience to have 50 people come into a room and one by one stand up and say, if you support this bill, you are a racist. If you vote for this bill, you are a white supremacist. And they say it over and over and over again. It is not a public policy dialogue. It is a heated, emotional argument that is not helpful to the situation, right? It is divisive language that I think hurts our country and hurts our state. I will say, for the most part, I'm very happy to say it doesn't hurt the relationships among the R's and D's, listening to it, but it is painful to listen to. And so if you're thinking about running for office, be ready to be called names. And the first few times it happens to you and you whine about it, if you're like me, your consultant will say, grow thicker skin, because there's just no way around it. Whatever you do and whatever bills you're going to vote on, you're going to get criticized. But that bill is constitutional and legal, and the reason we passed it, the last thing I'll say about it, the reason we passed it is if you look over the last 18 months around the country, all you have to do is add up the damages, right, in terms of treasure and lives lost because rioters, because violent criminals hijacked otherwise peaceful protest. They destroyed hundreds of businesses around this country, without regard, of course, to who owns the businesses. They don't care. They were bent on a path of destruction. But they didn't just destroy hundreds of businesses. In the process of doing so, they did more than $2 billion of damages. $2 billion. And dozens of lives were lost, both innocent bystanders and people that were protesting, law enforcement officers. All sorts of innocent lives were lost because of violent criminals. And Governor DeSantis and the legislature said, we aren't going to have that in Florida. Knock on wood, we haven't had it, and we're going to put a big deterrent out there. Oh, Xtavia said, I forgot a question. Tourism. Florida continues to exceed our estimating budgeting conference expectations every single month. Every month. To which I say, welcome to the free state of Florida. Welcome to the free state of Florida, where the government is not mandating which restaurants you can eat in and how many people they can seat and whether you can be indoor or outdoor. It's always an eye-opener. And we do, my wife's from New York, so we had family come visit us both last fall and early spring. And both times they just said, oh, this is so refreshing. I can go to a restaurant, I can do things, I can live my life. I haven't left my home in New York, right? I don't leave my apartment. I have my groceries delivered. It's not a way of life for people that love freedom, right? And I'm not commenting on, anybody's individual freedom and your choice to wear a mask or stay home or order in. That's great. I want you to have that right and that ability to do so because you have freedom. But I think it was the right call for Florida to stay open, and it's paying big dividends in terms of tourism. It's paying big dividends in terms of our budget because we are in large part, a tourism-driven economy. And I will tell you, I like to use this analogy or comparison as most legislators in Florida do because it makes us look good, but also because it's true. I like to compare us to New York, right? Because it wasn't that many years ago that we surpassed them in terms of population, but it's close. We have more people than New York, and their budget is more than double ours, more than double. And they are less free in New York. And New York, of course, doesn't require a balanced budget. They don't require it. So that's how they can get a budget double ours, because they spend themselves into debt, which is increasing every year, which then leads to problems with how do you pay your state employees, your teachers, your firefighters, the pension plans for all those hundreds of thousands of state employees that they have. How are they going to pay them one day? But I will tell you that in Florida, at the end of this year, we'll have more than $10 billion in reserves. $10 billion. It's a huge victory. So proud to live in Florida, proud to say that tourism is going well, and I think it's because we're a state that embraces freedom. All right, Xtavia has passed me the next question.
Don't tell her.
Totally sold you out. What internet taxes applied this year in a bill? Oh, were they applied this year in a bill? Yeah, great question. This would be more fun if the rest of the delegation was here because there was a break in your delegation. I won't speak to others' votes. I will say that was a tough bill this year. That was heavily debated in both caucuses. But Floridians are going to pay $1 billion more in internet sales taxes because we did pass an internet sales tax bill. Every year, they're going to pay $1 billion more now than they have been. Now, it's going to be a little bit from you and a little bit from you and a little bit from you. All of us that shop on Amazon, which is all of us, and all the other online vendors we may shop through. Now, you may have noticed over the past couple of years, for those of you old enough, you may notice that you're already paying taxes on a lot of them. So some companies are already voluntarily collecting that tax and remitting it to the individual states. And before this year, 48 out of 50 states already required it, but Florida wasn't one of them. And I don't know about you, but I miss the old days where that was truly a free market, no tax place you could go. Now I get it. it's grown so large and it continues to grow, it was too attractive for the government in every state and in this country. Said, we want to tax, we're missing all this taxable revenue. We want to tax that. But I didn't think that we should. So I was opposed to that bill and voted against it. It did pass. It was signed into law.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I will say, in defense of the people that voted for it, which is obviously a majority of the Florida House, I will say they did everything they could do to make this bill what they would call tax neutral. And the way they did it was, first of all, we would have had to have raised by millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars, taxes on business if we wanted to replenish the unemployment fund, which got decimated during COVID, or just sit back and wait that hope it fills back up before there's another crisis. And the other thing they did to make it tax revenue neutral was they reduced the commercial lease tax, the business rent tax. Florida's the only state in the country that charges businesses a tax when they have to lease space, like in a strip mall or wherever. And so that's good that we cut it down from 5.5% to 2% over time. It'll kind of work its way into law. But at the end of the day, I just wasn't willing to vote for taxes on you to cut taxes somewhere else. So I don't think that the government in Florida or anywhere else in this country has a revenue problem. We're not short on revenue. We're short on the backbone to spend less. We have a spending problem. We don't have a revenue problem. We have a spending problem. It's easy to see at the federal level, not just this year with all the infrastructure and other bills, and maybe, again, no shortage of great causes to spend money on. But for more than a decade, the federal government's been spending $4 trillion a year and bringing in $3 trillion. Right? You don't get to do that in your household income. If you make $30,000 a year, you don't get to spend $40,000 a year. Not every year anyway, right? Visa's going to come get you eventually. But that's what the federal government's been doing, but that's not what Florida's been doing. So yes, internet sales tax will become the law this year. It was already the law for businesses located in Florida. Now it will apply to businesses located outside of Florida. They're going to tax you when you buy everything online now. And in theory, they're going to remit it to the state of Florida. So we'll see how that works out. It looks like we have another question.
Can you touch on the Pip Repeal Bill that I believe is still sitting on DeSantis' desk to sign or not sign? And if you have an opinion, why you think that might actually save on auto premiums? And the next one, even though I think it was generated out of the Senate, a little bit more difficult. Can you talk about the impact fee restriction, and more specifically, why you think or you don't think the state should be imposing its will on the municipality, say what we can't do, whether you're for or against the impact fee?
Sure, great questions, both of them big issues for the Florida legislature this year. Let's talk about auto insurance first. Florida is the only state in the country that still has a system that we call no fault. Right, you're all carrying no-fault insurance right now because it's the law in Florida. And then that also came with, when they passed it, some caps on damages to prevent litigation, going after people for at fault. So you don't, even though you see Morgan & Morgan signs on every possible, bench and billboard, and you don't see a lot of them for auto accidents, not like you do in other states, because we have a no-fault system and we have caps on lawsuits. But we're the only state that does that. And we also have a very low amount of insurance that's required. $10,000 and $25,000, I think, is the number right now. But even with a no-fault system, which is designed to keep insurance rates low because it's designed to keep litigation costs low, and even with a low threshold of 10 and 25, we still have insurance companies losing hundreds of millions of dollars in Florida every year, and they can't operate that way. So you have an interesting situation where you have the insurance companies, you have the lawyers that sue people for a living, both saying this no-fault system is not working. We should go to a system that's based on fault. That's what every other state in the country does, and they call that system bodily injury. And essentially means if you're at fault, you're going to pay, right? It kind of makes sense. The big question is, will it save the consumers any money, right? If it saves the insurance companies money, again, another heavily regulated industry, the savings get passed on with oversight from the Office of Insurance Regulation. But the question is, will it save you any money? Now, I will tell you the analysis that they kept providing us as legislators wasn't up to date, and it was infuriating. The studies that they were providing us were from 2016 and 2017, or older. All of those studies said, yes, this will be a better system. It will drive down insurance rates in Florida. But that's not all of the answer, right? Because it won't impact people equally. If that bill becomes law, we don't yet know how the savings will be spread out. Will it be people like you, for example, maybe you're carrying $300,000 in coverage, right? Maybe you want to be protected from a serious accident. Hopefully you do. And you're carrying more than the minimums because that will best protect you. I feel like I'm selling insurance up here. But those people that are already buying a lot of insurance, the analysis would tell you they will save money because they no longer have to buy the no fault. It's a bodily injury driven system. And for a lot of reasons I won't go into, it is projected to save them money. But if you only buy the minimum amount of insurance in Florida, your premiums are expected to go up. And we also, when looking at this law, said 10,000, 25,000 is just not enough coverage. We got to go to 2550. And the reason we did that is just looking at the reality of, look, if you're driving down 41 or 301 or any road in Manatee County, or worse yet, your 17-year-old son is driving your car, and they change lanes without looking, or they don't exercise good defensive driving, and they hit one car and hits another. Well, if that car is a Tesla and an F-150, you're way beyond 1025, right? And you're going to be way beyond the minimums of 2550, which is why I think people should carry more insurance for their own protection. But the bottom line is we don't know what's going to happen to premiums. We do know that the impact will be different depending on how much insurance you have been buying and how much you're buying in the future. And I think it's a tough decision for the governor, right? I think there's a reason maybe it hasn't been signed yet, or maybe he just hasn't gotten to it, right? We did give him 275 bills to sort through. He obviously takes his job very seriously, so he's going through each one of them. I don't know what he's going to decide, but we do have among the most expensive auto insurance in the country. If we're not number one, we're in the top three for sure. So we want to drive down the rates. Governor DeSantis wants to drive down the rates for Floridians. The question is how to get there. What was the other question that you asked? Oh, impact fees, thanks. The impact fees, no, I meant thanks for reminding me. And thanks for a tough question. Impact fees, the Florida legislature decided this year to implement an annual increase cap so that you couldn't raise the impact fees by more than 12.5% a year. And it was to give stability to the marketplace because you had some local governments that were sometimes doubling their impact fees year after year. There's a great public policy argument to be had here on the impact fees, but I will say my position on impact fees is they are a tax. I don't know why we call them fees. They are a tax. And I believe that the government does best and the economy will prosper the most when we reduce taxes. Now, that said, you still have to find a way to fund those roads. I'll go back to my earlier point. I don't think we have a revenue problem. We have a spending problem. And I think if the government spent more of their money on infrastructure, we'd be in a better place. But the reason we passed that 12.5% cap was we essentially said that's enough of an increase every year. That's probably too much. 12.5% growth in cost or fees or profit, anywhere you apply 12.5%, if you're a business owner, you're thrilled. If you're borrowing the money, you're in misery, right? Now, some of us remember the days when interest rates in this country climbed to 18% and people couldn't afford to buy homes. Well, 12.5% is not far off. So I think we should have capped it even lower, but we gave local governments an ability to raise by 12.5%. And by the way, there's a safety valve. So if there is some exponential growth or some reason locally that you need to exceed 12.5%, there's a process to do so. And that's why we did it.
I just want to take an opportunity publicly as chairman of the Sarasota Housing Authority to thank you for making sure that we get at least 50% of the Sadowski funds. As you said earlier, it's been rated every single year. And any realtor here will tell you that we've been selling more and more housing in Florida. As that happens, we collect more on the dock stamps. So it's gonna increase the Sadowski funds, and at least 50% is better than zero, as you said. Now, the Sarasota Housing Authority also extends to Manatee County because we control the Section 8 program from there and the veteran VASH vouchers. So it's important to us to get some of that money so that we can build affordable housing and workforce housing. We want to focus on that because a lot of the workers cannot afford to live where they work. It's just getting ridiculous. So I wanted to thank you and the legislature for at least giving us something because, you know, we've been getting robbed for years. So now it's going to help us tremendously. So thanks a lot for that.
You're welcome, John. Thank you. And again, for John and Glenn and for everybody who operate in this space, thank you for doing that. And the realtors are big supporters of, affordable, attainable housing. And I think they've put in $5 million to put it on the ballot next year as a question for the voters. Now, I'm not a fan of amending our Constitution the way we do in the state of Florida so frequently, more than 200 times now. But it does show the commitment of the realtor organizations and the commitments of folks like the two of you, that you're that committed to get it in front of the voters to say you want more money for affordable, attainable housing. We'll see what happens. But yeah, happy to support to at least get to that 15%, and hopefully that continues into perpetuity.
One question, one comment. First of all, thank you for your service. Thank you for your service to our country and to our community here as well. What can we do to support you going into the next legislative session? Are there particular areas where you need input from the citizens to get a sense of where we stand?
Thank you, great question. The biggest thing that you can do for me is not be shy. Don't be shy about reaching out to me and either calling me or texting me or emailing me or saying, hey, I want to meet for coffee or I want to meet for lunch. I will do so. I want to hear what's important to you because that's how I best represent you. That is really how I learned, even though I drove on the roads and knew, but that's how I learned what was most important in terms of infrastructure. And any time that you do that, I'll be very grateful. I will close by saying, I have a quiz. Did some of you hear me speak yesterday in Sarasota County? Okay, good. I have a quiz question for you. And the winner will have first opportunity. I'll buy you breakfast or lunch, your choice, if you get this, whoever gets this first. A president said at their inauguration address in modern history, post-1950, that the rights we have come not from the generosity of the state, but from the hand of God. Who said it? Good guess. No. Eisenhower, another good guess, but no.
Reagan?
Not Bush, not Reagan.
I gotta give it to John F. Kennedy.
John F. Kennedy. John F. Kennedy. And I think if we return to our values and focus on our values, I would say return. Let's focus on our values and on our civics education and on civility and our public discourse. There are things we can agree on, many things. And 90% of the time in Tallahassee, we vote on a unanimous basis on the laws that we pass. 90% of the time. Don't let that 10% divide the country. And remember that these great rights that we have, that we codified in our Constitution, we did because our founding fathers believed that those rights came not from the generosity of a king or a government, but from the hand of God. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Representative Gregory. Please give him another round of applause. I do want to thank everyone for coming today. Please remember that we are accepting new membership. And if you were a member last year, you do have, please see Tanya because we're working it out since we were not able to meet as much last year. We are discounting whatever your membership was last year. We do have an immigration meeting coming up. Actually, Jim Boyd will be coming also to talk about the insurance bill. And we also have Vern Buchanan who has signed in for September. So we're trying to go ahead and get this schedule packed in. We will also be doing the Packed Glass Leadership Awards this year, and we have added one category. So please be looking because we want our members to actually vote for the recipients this year. We do not want to pick them ourselves. We want you all to vote for who you think we should have. I want to thank Charles Clapsaddle and METV for coming out today. Please give him a round of applause. He's always here for me. Pier 22 provides complimentary valet parking. We also want to thank them for allowing us to be here today. Thank you for all my board members who are present. Thank you, Tanya. You're doing a great job. And please come back next month. I always love having Tommy. If we have all of, and this is all of our representatives in Manatee County, this is about us working together to move for the future. This is not about color. This is about us coming together and actually giving a little to get a little, right? So thank you all for being here today. My name is Xavier. You have a great day.